老板 can share screen. Disabled.
Okay.
Okay, morning everyone. I'll just pick up from where Edmund has left off. So I will continue on construction drawings. I think today general is made mostly a very general overview of what it's supposed to be. Of course, there are a lot of details and elaboration that we can pick up from this topic later on. So I think those that have done this before, maybe you can like give some feedback and add on some pointers. All right, so the objectives of today is just to understand the intention of construction drawings and setting out drawings, understand the importance of why setting out needs to be super accurate in this whole topic, and also generally understanding the sequence of works and the drawing issuance priority, because in reality, ideally we want to issue all the drawings at one go and then just wash hands, but in reality it doesn't really work that way lah. So this is assuming that if we need to issue some drawings batch by batch, or if there are changes that come along the way during construction. Okay, and just identifying some of the setting out methods that are usually applied in our drafting. Okay, so before we move on, right, I think it's quite important for us to understand the stages of the project. So starting with schematic design, I think most of us know this. Schematic design, design development, which is your submission stage, and then moving on to tender, and then construction, and also the final completion. So these 5 stages are actually based on this is a industry common practice to use these 5 stages to determine an architectural project. So during different stages, right, there will be different drawings that are applied. Let's say in schematic design are mostly presentation drawings, schematic drawings, design drawings. They are very idealistic and very conceptual. And then when you move on to submission, that you need to do detailed drawings and to comply to all the bylaws and requirements. And then this will become your submission drawings and eventually become your approved drawings by whichever majlis or whichever authority that you submit to. So moving on, this was what Edmund has talked about, the tender drawings. You convert all these approved drawings into a drawing set that can be sent out for tender to get contractors or potential tenderers to bid for the job or award the job to. So moving on, construction drawings. Construction drawings are generally prepared by consultants. Sometimes you might hear the term shop drawings, but it's not to be confused, because shop drawings are actually produced by specialist contractors or specialist parties that are not covered by consultants. So for example, per se is say aluminium glazing works is actually a very specific scope of works that sometimes different manufacturers might have different sets of details. That's why they will produce their own short drawings to, and it's very detailed in that sense and very specific to the system that they design for. And then at the end, when it's completed, there might be a set of drawings called as-built drawings that are produced. So ideally, what I feel and I think what should be the way to go is that all these drawings, starting from design, development, and final completion, should be essentially the same drawing, because whatever you submit and approved by authority, right, should be whatever you construct on site. Yeah. So in terms of law is like that lah. So I would say that approved drawings equals to your tender drawings, equals to your contract drawings, equals to whatever is issued as construction drawings. It's the only difference that the only difference is that the level of information that are shown in these different sets of drawings, because in approved submission drawings, you might not need to show so detailed submission, so detailed setting out dimensions, because what we need to show is how we comply to the bylaws and requirements. But in terms of construction on site, right, you can't just show very general and basic dimensions because contractors don't know how to build it and they don't know where to start to build it. Yeah. So picking up from where Edmund has left off for tender drawings, the whole purpose is for tender, and the essence of it is to capture quantity and rates of what you have drawn on paper. So if you draw one line less in, say, 200 units, means you are missing out 200 units of something. So that is the essence of it. The quantity and rate has to be captured in tender drawings. And generally, the dimensions are quite basic and general. You don't need to have too detailed dimensions in this set of drawings just yet. But when you move on to construction drawings, because this is actually the final stage of your project already, right? So basically, you need to have as much detail as possible so that the contractor knows how to build what you draw on site. So it has to have exact positioning of every single thing that you draw, and everything that you draw has to have detailed setting out dimensions. Of course, we would like to have this ideal where once you issue construction drawings, one shot, no changes. But that is, it's not how it happens in the real world. There will always be some changes, maybe sometimes due to technical issues. Sometimes what we draw might not be practical or might not be easy to build. So there will be some changes or some adjustments to suit that matter. So I think it's very important for all of us to remember that construction drawings ultimately is whatever you draw is whatever is going to be built on site. So if you draw anything wrong, right, sometimes contractor I don't know, they play stupid or what but sometimes they really just bulat go and follow your drawings even if it's wrong, that they don't highlight, and that becomes the consultant's problem, becomes the architect's problem because our drawings are wrong. So that's why we have to keep in mind that it's very important to be accurate and very precise in this set of drawings. Yeah, so okay, just to make sure you all don't sleep, right? So maybe I'll just ask somebody just to recap, because since tender drawing was captured, not tender drawing was talked about not too long ago. So maybe Steve, you want to just recap what are the drawings that are included in tender set? I think you've been through this process also, right? So maybe you can just refresh everybody. What are the drawings that are included?
So as I understand, the tender drawings include the schedules, the general GA plans, and then there are the detailed drawings, and yeah, and then there are also the enlarged plans.
Mm.
Do I go further more detail, or is this enough?
That's okay. It's good enough.
All right.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so this one was generally covered by Edmund already. Basically, construction drawing set should take over what has been produced in tender drawings and elaborate more for areas that cannot be shown or not shown enough in tender drawings. Because this comes to construction already. So it will come to a point where sometimes even your enlarged plans are not detailed enough. You might have to do like even enlarged versions of that sort of that set of plans, like say part prints or scale 1 to 10, scale 1 to 2, that sort of drawings to be able to show the amount of detail. Yeah, to show the amount of detail that you need to construct on site. So there will always be a set of introductory drawings, general notes, drawing codes, and drawing description. This one was talked about the other day also when Janice mentioned this set of notes have to be very accurate and tally back with all your drawings. Yeah, so drawing lists, these are very general introductory drawings: key plan, location, site plan, your GA plans, the basic base plans, base section, and base elevations that we need. And large drawings, I didn't really elaborate on this because every project is different. And basically the essence is that any drawing that cannot cover any details that cannot be covered under here or here, you need to do an enlarged drawing. Be it section, be it plan, be it elevation. You just need to enlarge the area from maybe 1 to 200 scale to 1 to 50 scale, or maybe even to 1 to 10 scale. So depending on the area itself. Okay, then these are the standard details that we might need. Of course, different projects might have special details that we need to cover as well. So finisher schedule, sanitary wares, ironmongeries, all these are pretty much quantity based, and it's a pretty much quantity based drawings, or rather a document. So tender drawings should have already captured this quantity, but of course, as we go along the project, we need to always cross-check whether these quantities are still relevant, and we need to keep updating it from time every now and then. Okay, so that's basically the construction drawing set. Whatever you have in tender, you need to expand it more and sort of, I would say, convert it to construction drawings. But let's say if your tender drawings are so good, right? Every dimension you have given, every area you pretty much covered and give enough information, it's basically equals to your construction drawing already. So far so good? Anyone need to add on?
Good.
Otherwise, I'll move on. Yeah. Okay, so the most important thing in construction drawings is the setting out drawings. So this is just a brief explanation of what is setting out drawings. So basically, you need to transfer your drawings from, you need to transfer your information from 2D paper to actually building on site. So the details that you give in this, the information that you give now has to be very, very detailed and very, very accurate. And it might consist of coordinates, dimensions, or angles that you need to, anything that will help you determine the exact positioning on site. So let's say if you want to set out your boundary, you might need to get coordinates. You need to get the surveyor in to actually mark out the coordinates on site to actually determine the exact boundary. Yeah, so this should be considered from all aspects of drawings, from plans, elevations, any enlarged drawings, details and schedules. So basically what we saw in the last slide. Okay, second question, maybe Funyi, maybe you can can you try to identify the sequence of work that might happen, that will happen on site? Let's say a construction project is going on. Which one do you think will go first? The sequence. Just try. No need to be scared whether you got it right or wrong.
I think the earthworks, and then foundation, and then structural, and then architecture. After that is M&E.
Okay. Ryan, do you think it's the same, or maybe you have different opinion? Wow, sleeping. Okay, anyway, so from what Funyi has said, earthworks to foundation to structure, architecture, M&E. I'll let you know later. But let's move on to the next slide first. So we can think about, let's say when we do setting out drawings, right? We can think about it from macro to micro, outside to inside, inside to outside. there's really not a fixed sequence for every scope of works, but generally the framework is there lah. Usually within the building, you will include the substructure, superstructure, and then from superstructure, you can also still divide it into overall, where you start with the structural framework. Then you can determine it by floor and room by room. So that's how it goes in that sense. And then any of the canopies and roof and coverings. So on the outside of the building, of course, your boundary, you need to set out your grid lines. This one probably will happen before you actually start any work on site. These are the most important thing that you need to determine at the site itself. And then infrastructure works when there's all these pipe routings, TMB connections, storage connections, water connections, your road and driveways, and also your landscaping works. If it's a special project, there might be other scopes of work that might be covered, but I'm just talking from a typical project, typical high-rise project. Standard, these are pretty much the things that are covered. So let's say if you are doing a drawing, but you're not really sure if this setting up, whether you should do or not. I think usually how I think about it is whether this scope of works will affect the aesthetics and the appearance of the building. Because the architects will design the building, right? So when we design the building, we decide like how it's gonna look, how it's gonna the circulation flow, the space usage. So we decide all this. So for me, if I don't know whether this scope of work falls under me, I always think that whether it affects the appearance of the building or aesthetics of the building. Then if this thing actually affects the appearance or aesthetics, right, then most likely it's under my scope already. Unless there are IDs or landscape consultants that are also on board to take over those sort of scope. But if there's no landscape, no ID, then everything becomes back to the architect already. Yeah, so I think it's just a back of the mind kind of tip. If you're not sure, then maybe you think about it in this way, whether it affects your design in any sense. Okay, so what Funi said was pretty much correct. The only difference is that structural works and architectural M&E works, right? Sometimes they tend to overlap because you cannot just do the structure all the way up first, then only you start architectural work. So it's not efficient for contractors program. So sometimes maybe they start like 3-4 floors, 5 floors, or a certain number of floors. After they finish, then they can start to bring in the architectural works, like say your brick wall, your door and window. Then they will start to mark out and set out on site, and then start to progress with that scope of works. So usually this is the general sequence. So if your drawings are not issued at one go, then maybe we can think about it in this way, that the sequence of works might help you determine better which drawings are more important to be issued first. So when it's foundation basement works, right, it's not so important to issue door and window schedule just yet, because there will be your columns, your wall setting out and everything that might be more important, assuming there's no basement. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just roughly break down the architectural drawings that are required during each stages. But if anybody has experienced a bit more than this, maybe you can help to add on, because this is based on what I have gone through so far. So during earthworks, earthworks is mostly no building yet, but more importantly is for us to set out the boundary of the site. So boundary setting out is very, very important, and it has to be super accurate, because imagine if your boundary is totally off, like you are encroaching into other people's lot, then it's a big issue, because then you will affect your submission, you will affect the neighboring lot, the owner of the lot itself. And it's a can of worms when you do something wrong like that, then a lot of issues will start to pop up and then a lot of trouble after that. Okay, so set out your boundary well, it must be set out accurately. And then after that, we need to start putting on our hoarding and signboard. So this is to demarcate that there's work going on at this area. So this one will be based on your approved plans, your submission plans, your boundary and your hoarding plan, all are based on what is approved when you submitted. You can also attach overall layout plans, but then not really the most important thing yet, because it's basically just earthworks. So moving on to foundation, some buildings might have basement, some buildings might not have basement, but it's good to have an overall layout plan given in this stage of works, just because people might want to refer and see what is going on, what needs to be built eventually. So after you set out your boundary, your grid line has to be accurate. So if the grid, same like the grid boundary, if the grid line is off, right, means your whole building is basically deviated already. Deviated means like sengit lah, off dimension lah. Okay, and then foundation works, I think this is quite important because sometimes contractors tend to look at only engineering drawings because they assume foundation works is always engineer column, piling, pile cap, whatever foundation footings. All these drawings are produced by the engineer. But for us, right, I think we need to be involved as well, because all these piling points and pile caps, foundations, it relates back to your structure of the building. So let's say same thing, if all these are deviated already, means your building structure also sengit already. So when the building structure is sengit, right, maybe your columns are designed properly, 8.4 meters column to column for car park. But let's say if all these pile caps are deviated so much, right, you become like 7 meters, then your space is affected. So I think this one is very important for us to take note, because it actually affects the building when it goes up. You might not see it now, but it affects the building when you start to build higher floors. Yeah, so and foundations, and substructure, you have all the structural walls, any retaining wall, lift pits, all these has to be set out by us. So what I think is any setting out, right, has to be produced by architect, not the engineers. Engineers will only produce the details that are required for, say, the columns, the beams, the slab, but then the demarcation of the positioning of columns, the demarcation of walls, and all these slab edges, right, is all determined by the architect. So not to be taken lightly, I feel.
Also level, floor level.
Yep. Anything that affects the building space usage itself should go back to the architect. Okay, so moving up, superstructure, you always start with the structural works first. Mostly they will cast the column first, then only cast slab and beam, and then any of the structural walls that are required. So architectural drawings that are involved, basically the whole essence of construction drawings is about setting out. So you have columns, you have the wall setting out, whether it's brick wall, non-load bearing walls, RC wall, all the thickness of the walls has to be captured at this point already. Yeah, especially structural walls, because when they cast, right, sometimes they will cast together. Like let's say when they cast the slab and beam, if there's a structural wall that need to be casted, there will always be starter bars to connect the walls from the slab to the ceiling, to the other slab to the soffit. So anything that affects structural casting, all the drawings have to be out by now. So let's say if your door and window is part of the RC wall, like for example, shear wall, when you have high-rise buildings, your typical unit, sometimes we need to have an opening at the shear wall. So all these have to be taken into consideration already as you start to do structural works, because when the contractor does the formwork, right, they will actually set out the opening already. Yeah, so other drawings like sections is very important because they need to know floor to floor height, and any of floor or wall openings. More importantly, floor first, because they will cast the slab first, then only they build the wall. So floor or wall openings for services, I think this one is a whole process of itself. We need to coordinate with the engineers, the CNS engineer, the M&E engineer. We need to determine where needs to have openings for all the services. That is because when you cast, right, let's say you're a 30-story building, and there's gonna be lots of services going on in the whole building, right? If let's say you have 100 pipes that you didn't allow for when you cast, right, means when you want to start doing your M&E services, you're gonna have 100 holes you have to core, and later on only you make the hole for the services, which is actually a very expensive process, and it's very tedious because there are so many things that you have to do. Okay. So usually, if it's a high-rise building, right, we will allow for pipe sleeves. Pipe sleeves, basically, you just identify where the locations are, you put a pipe sleeve, and then next time when the M&E comes and install services, it will just go through the pipe sleeve. So we don't want to have any additional hacking or coring works because it's extra cost. So when you're casting slab, we also need to take into consideration toilet details sometimes, because most of the time, because there will be a lot of floor traps, the plumbing, the sewer works, all has to come into consideration at this point. Staircase detail, this one also because it's RC works, right? But usually they won't do the staircase together with structure. They will probably start after structure a few floors are done. Okay, so far so good. So structural works. Moving on will be architecture and M&E works. Sometimes these things can happen concurrently. So I will just, usually architecture and M&E works happen concurrently. So I kind of lumped it together. So architectural works for superstructure, these are the drawings that we need because it starts to zoom into from whole building to floor by floor and also to room by room. So whatever that cannot be shown in your general plans, your plan section elevations, then at this point you need to start having enlarged plans, detailed drawings, and schedules to determine what is inside this scope of architectural works. Okay, I won't really go into what kind of plans are needed because I feel every project might be slightly different, but the general drawings are covered in the construction drawing set just now. So I'll show a couple of examples later, just to give you an idea of it. So when it comes to architectural works, superstructure, and also basement, if there's basement car park or basement spaces, then this will be applicable as well. Any enlarged area for setting out floor plans, it can be 1 to 20, it can be as small as 1 to 200, 1 to 50, or even 1 to 10, depending on how much information you can show. It comes into consideration with your joint and termination details, how your wall actually sits on the slab, how your finishes material have to terminate from the wall joint to the floor joint. So these are the important things that you might not see, you might not think is important when you produce the drawings, but when it comes to construction, it becomes very important because that actually determines how you want the finish building to look like. So especially termination and joints, right? Sometimes we always take like typical details and put it in our drawing set. But when it comes to this stage, when it's built, then you might see that, actually that's maybe it's not what I want. Yeah, so this shouldn't be taken lightly also lah. So all of the setting out drawings have to consider the wall positioning, the rooms, the levels, the floor material, ceiling material. Let's say if you have ID, then this whole chunk of work here, you might not need to be so involved because ID, they usually also will have like their own setting out. Like let's say for hotel rooms or typical units where you have ID involvement, they will determine and coordinate the fitting position, all this anything that goes on the ceiling or anything that goes on the wall, like PowerPoint, switches, especially for hotel, I would say. So if there's no ID, then basically architect have to do all of this. Not easy there. Okay, so I'll show you a couple of examples of setting out drawings. This one is when Harbour City was doing substructure works like foundation and piling works. So we actually set up the columns and the core walls. This is the base drawing that we set up, so that when we determine the column location, then the pile cap location has to follow that. So how we set out these, the important components have to be the boundary, the grid line, the positions of the wall, the columns, and also the dimensions. I will zoom in slightly. So let's say if your column is sitting right in the middle of the grid line, then it's quite straightforward because the grid line already determines the dimensions and the setting out of this column. So these are usually the standard type of setting out that we use. There might be more when there's special elements, but I think in this case it's still quite straightforward. So when you have lift core wall, what we did was we decide the setting out, one point of setting out, and then we start pulling dimensions from there. So let's say if this will be our setting out point, because in AutoCAD we draw is very ideal. So in AutoCAD draw, you get very accurate dimensions from this grid line to where your lift core needs to be, right? So usually we will take a setting out point. It's kind of like how you do your tile setting out. You start pulling dimensions, you start to give like wall thicknesses, the whole length of the core wall, and then you determine, because this point is in the middle of nowhere, so you need to tie it back to your grid lines, because grid lines will be set out on site first before you do the core wall. So from this point, we actually pull back a dimension to the nearest grid line in this. So you see here 12754850. This is the reference of this wall to the grid line. So let's say if the column is not in the middle of a grid line, it's like out of nowhere, or your grid line just doesn't cover it, it's also doable, quite straightforward. Usually we will always take center to center. So contractors will always mark out the center point and then start to build from there. So you take the nearest dimension to the grid line. You need to do it in x-axis and y-axis as well. So in this case, it's already sitting on the X grid line. We just need to pull it back to the Y grid line. And then if there's any angled walls or angled columns, then you have to also give the angle of your column or wall. Okay, so that is on the more general, the macro ones, the column, the walls, the general outline of it. And then this one is an example of individual unit. So previously we had a lot of individual service suite units. So it comes to a point where you have to set up every single wall, every single opening, and the distance of the wall and your windows, your doors, everything all the dimensions has to come in already. So if there's Sometimes you need to give angles as usual. So every information that you put in this drawing is basically helping the contractor to realize your dreams. You draw, you design a building, you design a space, but when you want to build it, you need to have enough information to build it. So we also included here all the door and window labels because the exact sizes can be reflected in the door and window schedule. So contractor has to take all these set of drawings, combine it, and combine all this information that are given to him and carry out the works on site. This is an example of an ID drawing. I only plucked out the electrical fittings plan for this project because we had ID. So it comes to a point where even every single power point, every single switch point, telephone points, all of these have to be set out in the drawing. Yeah. I'm not sure if you have actually seen cases where a typical room, right, when they're doing all these wiring and cabling works, right? Let's say if this point is set up wrongly, then it affects your bed location, it affects your just the ergonomics of how you use the space. So all these points are very tiny, but you don't realize the importance of it until you actually use the space. I think like sometimes when you go to a hotel room or you go to a space, suddenly you see like, why this say distribution box? Suddenly if it's in the middle of nowhere in your living room, you also think it's very weird, right? So all these things have to be considered carefully and set up carefully. And then if all these points are done wrongly during construction stage, the contractor will always have to hack the wall and redo again because mostly all these points are concealed in the plaster.
Sorry, it's a RC wall. When they build RC shear wall, so they have to mark this conceal together.
And if it's brick wall, then usually they will create like a sort of a shallow gap inside so that they can sit the wiring works. So if it's wrong, right, means all these points have to be done again, and then your brick wall will have a lot of and your plaster works later, you will see the cracks because there are too many rectifications that go on behind. Okay, toilet details are quite straightforward. I think most of us have seen drawings like this before. So in toilet details, we have to set out all the sanitary points, sanitary wares, all the fittings, all these usually always set out center to center lah. When they mark out the point, then they can adjust accordingly. Okay, every single thing has to be set up, your sanitary ware, your floor trap, scupper drain, all the defining walls, any of these risers that need to house all the M&E pipe works, everything has to be given and detailed enough so that it can be built. Reflected ceiling, this one actually didn't hatch, but usually we will hatch. Let's say if plaster ceiling, then we hatch and we give the ceiling height, and then if any light fittings or anything that needs to go up to the ceiling, then you have to set out. And when it comes to zoom in spaces like that, right, we usually will set out from the wall instead of grid line, because let's say if your wall is 3850 distance, right, and you want to set this usually we set this accordingly to the wall because when it comes to this point, the grid line, I suppose the grid line is not so critical at this point because the wall has already been defined. So let's say if you want this, right, maybe you draw 3850, but then when contractor build on site, human not perfect, it might be slightly deviated. So you just want to take like distance from wall to wall and set out in the middle, something like that. I think some cases it could be that way. Okay, another important thing is the floor material setting out. So every time when we do this, just as an example, when you do tile setting out, there will always be a setting out point, and then you start laying your tiles from that point, from the floor and also onto the walls. Something that we need to take note is when we do tile setting out on drawing, we just have to avoid like areas like at the edge, right? Sometimes the room is not exactly the tile size. When we do tile size, when we do the setting out, right, we just need to take note like whatever is left over at the edge. If it's too small, right, like say 50 mm, 20 mm, or it becomes like a very ugly thing, like a rat tail like hanging around like that. So just make sure that when you set up, right, let's say if there's extra, right, you might want to equal out both sides to have maybe say at least 150, so that it's not so eyesore. But of course, this one, different people will have slightly different standards for this. But I think somewhere around 150 will be good enough to not make it look so like so random. Okay, so in terms of section elevation, the heights of your ceiling, the heights of say your any of this wall. Sometimes the wall don't go all the way up to ceiling. Then what level should it stop? And then all these fittings, all the pipe bidet, all the bidets and your basin, your countertop, the height that you need to build to. And this one is a facade setting up detail. So for Harbour City, we actually had like external fins. So we have two types. The first type is RC, which is this one that they cast together with the slab. And the other one is aluminum fins where they install separately after the wall and the structure has been built up. So we need to set up properly the distance from fin to fin, uh, the distance from the wall, the distance from in terms of height. So every single dimension has to be given. Of course, sometimes when there are not enough information given, right, contractor will always send us RFI request for information. So drawings not captured is not the end of the day. Sometimes when they start to query us, it's actually a good thing because they are actually looking properly at your drawings. If they don't send RFI or any queries, right, then you need to be scared because sometimes we might miss out some things. Hopefully not, but sometimes unavoidable when we miss out some things and contractor don't really look into it. When they build, they don't highlight to you, then they just build the wrong thing together. So that's why all these are very important, and it's not just simply draw lah, especially when it's construction, right? When the building is going up, you don't really have enough time sometimes to produce the drawings fast enough. So that's why if we can capture accurate drawings during tender, that would be the best. And then when you carry out the construction, it's mostly just catering to site changes like site needs. Maybe some things cannot build, then you have to do some adjustments, but not major changes and not major drawing production should be at this stage. Okay, this one, the last one here is actually an additional drawing that we had to do after that because it wasn't captured in part of our tender. So we needed a ceiling high level maintenance gap, and we need to install catwalks. So if you can capture catwalks during your tender stage is good because it's actually a cost as well. So all these dimensions, basically setting up construction is all about dimensions. You need to build, means you need to have dimensions, you need to have enough of information like all these specifications, all these have to come in so that can build. The essence of it is pretty straightforward. But the level of information that we give has to be enough. In tender might be quite general, but when it comes to construction, it has to be exactly what you want to be built on site. Okay, so that's just an overview of setting up drawings and construction drawings. So just to recap, hopefully hopefully at the end of the session we understand the intention of construction and setting up drawings. We understand how important it is to set up accurately, and the sequence of works and the drawing issuance priority, and also the type of setting up that we need to consider when we produce these drawings. Hopefully if you don't pick up all of these, maybe one or two things that you remember when you start doing your drawings, it actually will be very helpful. It always keep yourself always have the intention in your mind that when you do construction drawings means everything has to be built on site already. So when it's going to be built, everything has to be super accurate. And then when you start drawing, you need to start thinking as well. Don't just blindly draw. When you draw, you need to think like, if I draw this, can the contractor translate the information onto site? Sometimes when we draw, it's very ideal, but then sometimes you have to change your perspective. Like, let's say, put yourself in a contractor's point of view. Is this information enough for you to build? If you are the contractor, you get this set of drawings, can you carry out the works? Can you actually build it? If there's not enough information, then your drawing needs to buck up. Give more details, give more enlarged plans, more dimensions, or more information that the contractor will need. Yeah, so basically that's it. Wow, 10:30. All right, thank you. If there's anything to add on, I'm happy to I'm happy to share. Like maybe boss some things that I missed out, or Edmund when piling stage or foundation stage, the things that are missed out, maybe you can add on also lah.
I think another important aspect of construction drawing is about coordination. During the construction, some of the item, especially M&E, their shop drawing come in late. Then the process, we gather all the info together, the M&E to so you all maybe need to know lah. We have to maybe another session talk about this coordinated drawing.
Yep. Because that one also quite a lot of. It's a whole topic on its own.
Because most of us architects sit in the office, we don't really meet a lot of people in one shot. And I mean, how to gather all these M&E, NSC, their shop drawing, and also maybe landscape, even suppliers drawing, ID drawings. So when all coming together, then we will find a lot of issue. So that is the construction drawing games. That's a different with tender. Okay. Kenny, want to add anything?
Because of the time constraint, I suggest maybe tomorrow we have a Q&A on this topic. Is it okay to all?
Can I guess so.
Yeah, because also thanks for Rachel. Rachel have done a very good presentation, very informative. And then the most important is this is your real life project experience, and we can see in custom make this presentation. Did you? Good job. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is produced from I see produced from zero. Is can produce. I mean, with this, our CHY have new set of reference and system. Hope all others can appreciate.
Okay, so if everyone don't have any more question today, because supposedly tomorrow is Friday, right? Supposedly should be our another colleague, Alan, have to present his sharing lah. So Rachel, you want to continue your sharing or let Alan proceed first?
I think Ellen can proceed first. I think
You
need a
need to
bit of,
prepare also, ma.
yeah, I need a bit of time for the coordination ones. And also because
Okay.
his experience in also will cover construction, right? The whole process, right?
Not sure. Alan, what you going to cover tomorrow?
Housing, landed.
Mostly on the drawing list
Submission,
or
is
what?
it? Submission.
I think it's
Also,
tender
also
list.
tender. It just is we want to touch more on landed housing.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I think I need a bit of time. Maybe next week. Next week.
I think next week Thursday. I think you just maintain your Thursday lah. Next week Thursday, come back to your turn. And tomorrow we let Alan proceed first to share his experience on the shop lot and also landed housing. So Alan, you get ready tomorrow. And just to inform everyone, next week Monday we have the tile suppliers presentation, so-called training. They call it training. It's very important for all of us to attend. So I have put everyone's name in the attendance list to our suppliers. So the training will start from 10 a.m. to 10:30. But if we got Q&A session, right, maybe we'll extend a bit more until 11. So everyone have to attend.
9 o'clock, is it?
9 o'clock, sorry. 9 o'clock to 10:30. So be on time, because they will be ready straight start at 9 a.m. And once I receive the link from the suppliers, then I will post in the chat group. Other than that, I just update this. I actually in the Meet update this MCO timetable list for everyone to fill in. So once ready, I will put in the chat group also. And next week might have another supplier presentation. Is from our Agia glass, because yesterday Edmund just touched on the glass specification, right? So I've contacted the supplier. So maybe next week, either Thursday or Friday. So I will update in the CHYA group. All right. Anything to add on? If not, we will end our morning sharing.
Alan,
Okay lah, I think end.
Alan, esok
Alan?
boleh ah? Alan?
Connecting to audio, I think his mic got problem. But he knows, I think he knows already.
He knows.
Okay. So tomorrow, same time, everyone use this link to join in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.